This is the fourth lecture for Chapter 18, Environmental Health and Human Hazards. And we'll mention this already in the third lecture, but it's to come back to it, the idea of bioaccumulation and biomagnification, just the difference between those, as we can see here. One that we'll point out here, which is a real big environmental topic, is methyl mercury, which can come out of incinerators and smokestacks, whatever else you like. And it can gather in the atmosphere, comes down, falls into the water, and can find a way of moving its way up into the food chain. So methyl mercury is something that is listed as being fat soluble and can get stored up in the body and can bioaccumulate and magnify in fish. So sometimes it lists as far as the size of a fish you should eat or not eat based upon that factor right there. Okay, different types of listings for diseases. We mentioned these, I think, a little bit earlier on, but this is the second, I think, of 3 times that we'll mention here. Chronic disease is something that comes on slowly. Heart disease is a good example of that. And acute disease is something that, comes on rather quickly, and that would be Ebola. So we mentioned this as far as persistence. Again, vocab word here. There's a couple listings of some chemicals that are out there and how long they last. DDT is a really bad one because it lasts for a long time. And again, that's an endocrine disruptor, so it has an effect as far as, allowing a individual, whether it's a reptile or whatever, or amphibian, to mature or develop into a male. That's usually the case. Atrazine is another one that we mentioned before, is an herbicide that can persist for a really long time and has a negative effect on organisms. So, if it's bad for humans, it's worse for children, and it has everything to do with these listings here. Pound for pound, kids are smaller, and their exposures is greater for whatever chemical it happens to be. The other thing is that kids, their hygiene habits aren't quite as good as adults, so everything seems to go in the mouth, so they're more likely to become contaminated. And the last one listed here is kids usually have a lower immune system than adults, so therefore they don't have the same ability to fight off infections if it happens to be a pathogen or whatnot. 2 different ways of looking at contaminants that come into the environment. And this is a little surprising in how this works, is the majority of countries, and the United States is one of these, is use the innocent until proven guilty standpoint. So you develop some new chemical and help yourself, put it on the market. That's pretty much how it works for 99.5% of chemicals that are out there. So you may have the impression that you see a chemical out there, whether it's in your food or it's something you're going to throw on your lawn, and say, well, they wouldn't allow me to do it if it wasn't tested. Yes and no. It has been tested, but is it absolutely certain that it's not going to cause a problem? No. Not until over long periods of time. So there's a lot of chemicals that we're exposed to, and we may not know the long-term effects of these for many, many years. There's pros and cons to that. I mean, if we said nothing can be on the market without testing, well, then that would very much limit the amount of good chemicals that we do have. So the other principle, we just had the innocent until proven guilty method. The other one is the precautionary principle, and that states that you cannot put it on the market until it has been tested more thoroughly. And I believe that's used a little bit more in Europe than it is in the United States. Well, it's not used in the United States. But as we mentioned here before, there's many reasons why the innocent until proven guilty method is used, but something a consumer should be aware of. So risk analysis, there's a couple questions in the test that you'll see on this. Generally, it's the idea of just kind of looking at a larger scope of things as far as what is our exposure and what are we willing to do about it to limit our exposure to a particular risk. So mathematically, we can look at a system as far as risk analysis based upon 2 things. One is the system itself, how reliable is the system, and the other one is humans. So a lot of our accidents that we've had over many, many years is mostly based upon this. You hear these recalls on the market once in a while. that the brakes are bad or there's some other part of a car that they have to fix, and that's based upon the technology. But by far the largest contributor is the human portion. This is kind of a funny little scenario here. I don't know if it was intended that way or not, but yeah, nuclear power is 71% reliable. That does not make me feel comfortable. But there's a lot of different, probably better scenarios that we could look at here and say, what is the reliability, the system reliability of that particular discussion. All right, this is the ones that you have to be somewhat familiar with for the test when they come up. So risk analysis has three parts. You have risk assessment, is pretty much just identifying what is the risk, what is it about, what is the dosage that someone could be exposed to, and what is the extent that someone could be exposed to it. And then you have to have a discussion and say, okay, well, what are we willing to accept for exposure? And we have to look at this as far as the people. So again, some chemicals we can't have in the United States because people don't want it. But we can't use them in other countries because, well, they don't have the same social means of rejecting it, or the economics to do something else. Anyways, so you have this as far as the acceptance, and then you have the management. So what are we going to do to put this in place to make sure everyone is on board with it? So all three of these you do have to be familiar with. Looking at this one, we're switching over to some other exposures that we have and the risks that we have with them. Tobacco use, as far as deaths, this is astronomical in comparison to everything else. You look at like car accidents and whatever else we may have, yeah, that's quite a bit more deaths from it. And this is a choice. If you know anyone who smokes, make them stop. It's very, very bad. And you have all these other scenarios listed here as well. This was really an odd way of making the comparison. It's what our book used. Looking at the number of 747s that could crash. If each one of these had 400 passengers on it, well, poverty. This is, 75 number of deaths per year in the world from various causes. So we'd have to have 75 passenger planes crashing every single year. That seems to me needs to be a little bit higher, but okay, I'll just go with it. Just look at the comparison. But the number one cause of death, as far as a risk factor goes, would be poverty. Probably don't have to think too hard about that, but it is a very large problem. The second one is a choice. Poverty isn't necessarily a choice. But tobacco use is a very large factor as well. And then the flu, and you can see on down the line. So we have a good comparison. But poverty, without a doubt, is a huge cause of death, or at least is a risk factor for death. So perceiving what is a potential risk is not necessarily as reality. So sometimes we have a fear of something which isn't necessarily realistic. So the idea of swimming in the ocean, being afraid of a shark attack, extremely not unlikely. Whereas driving in a car or smoking cigarettes or having a bad food diet, those would be much, much greater than getting attacked by a shark. So these are just some odds looking at here. Again, you probably don't have to think too hard about this, but to see it in such a fashion really does kind of hit home as far as what is the largest potential risks that you have out there. So you have a potential risk of 1 in 7 or 1 in 5 to suffer from one of those two diseases there, and then on down the line. So it is interesting when you look at some of the things that we're afraid of. The airplane accidents, quite low in comparison. Again, we mentioned before as far as shortening the life, this is just a different perspective on that same data. But, you have poverty as, again, a number one hazard that a person could have. Being born male, just statistically, as far as our habits, wars, and gunfights, or whatever else you might have going on there. But these are all potential risks that people have going on down the line. So, smoking, going back to that one again. All these different chemicals you can find in cigarette smoke. I'm not sure exactly how they get in there, whether it's just the treatment or I'm not even going to take a further guess. I looked it up and I couldn't get a good answer for it. But benzene, toluene, some heavy metals that are in there, it's all full of some good stuff. Yeah, no, no. All right, a couple more we'll mention here. Epidemiology is a study of disease and how it moves through people, person to person. And there's two different ways we can look at that. We can look at retro, which is typically how it is done, looking at how people are exposed from the past and trying to make sense of how that works, maybe for the future. And then that leads, of course, to prospective. So we look at people and their habits and their lifestyles to try to get an idea of what kind of exposures they might have. And the last one on here is chronic studies versus acute. A chronic study is a very long-term study, so when you hear about a study being done for 10 years, that would be a chronic study. And an acute study would be more like your epidemiological studies, that a bunch of people got sick in a restaurant, and we're taking a look at that and see what actually happened. How did that occur? And I believe that's our last slide. There it is. Done.